Welcome, travelers, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable. For when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
Hello, travelers. PA Nightmares here. I've noticed that over 30% of my viewers are not subscribed to the channel. So, if you're a new or a returning viewer and you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you like what I do, liking the video and commenting as well, as it really helps push this video into the algorithm and it really does help the channel grow. Well, I've taken enough of your time. On to the main event. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places, ever since I first visited a deserted train graveyard several years ago. So, when I heard a rumor about something strange going on in an abandoned factory on the edge of town, I was intrigued. It was an area I was unfamiliar with, but the factory was easy enough to find, located in the middle of a rundown industrial estate. Thankfully, there was no security, and I didn't see any cameras watching me. I climbed through a gap in the fence without difficulty, and then I was in. Simple as that. I'd never been inside a factory like this before, so I wasn't sure what to expect. It seemed like it had been neglected for a while. Piles of dirt and rubble were stacked up around the door, and they were all locked when I tried them. After looking around for some time, I found a broken window around the back. There were still shards of glass sticking out from the corners, so I shrugged off my jacket and wrapped it around my fist, using it to smash and brush away the rest of the glass. Using the top of the window ledge to hoist myself up, I swung in through the window and landed with a heavy thump on the other side. A cloud of dust erupted from my feet, making me cough. The rest of the glass was littered across the floor. I was careful to pick my way over it, digging the torch I had brought out of my bag. As I clicked it on and shone it around, I realized I was in some kind of storage room. Piles of boxes and containers were stacked haphazardly against the wall, and in the middle of the floor, when I peeled one open, they seemed to be full of old rusty equipment and broken machinery parts, presumably from when this was still a working factory. Leaving them behind, I approached the door and tried the handle. At first, I thought it was locked, but after a few more attempts, it finally shuddered open, cracking on rusty hinges. The noise seemed to echo loudly in the open warehouse beyond, and I waited a moment to see if it stirred up any activity, but all was silent. According to the rumors, strange noises had been heard coming from inside the factory at night. I was aware of 2 people, which were reported to have gone missing in the area. It was never made conclusive whether the events were connected or separate coincidences, but as a result, the abandoned factory had a reputation for being haunted. Regardless of what the truth really was, I wasn't here to prove people's theories. I simply enjoyed exploring, especially places where the public weren't necessarily allowed. That was why I had come while it was still dark. Stepping out from the storage room, I found myself in the main warehouse. Most of the machines had been taken down and stored or transported elsewhere. Only a couple remained, casting hulking shadows in the beam of my flashlight. The walls were lined with huge industrial pipes and metal poles, and the high ceiling created a strange echo inside the building. Each footfall seemed to ricochet off the wall, creating a cacophony of noise. I could only imagine what it would be like when all the machines were switched on. I didn't remember what kind of noise the rumors purported, but it seemed to me that the factory's strange inner proportions could be responsible for the abnormality of sound people claimed to hear. I pulled my camera out of my bag and started snapping some pictures. I ran a blog in which I documented my exploration of abandoned spaces. So I always liked to have a visual representation of where I'd been. It also served as proof that I wasn't just making it all up. I took photos of the rusted walls and debris, the machines that were still standing, and the control panels that had been corroded into place. I tried to brush aside some of the cobwebs, but the dust was so thick, I instantly pulled my hand away in disgust. There were 2 sets of stairs on the other side of the room. One was going up onto a balcony, the other disappearing down to the darkness. There was what appeared to be a control room upstairs. After packing my camera away for safekeeping, I decided to head there first. I was barely on the second step when something made me pause. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice echoing from upstairs that spiraled down into the basement. I waited, listening, assuming I had imagined it. But then I heard it again, and my whole body went numb.
Maxie, is that you?
The voice was female, young, and it made my heart thump just a little quicker. I staggered at a breath, turning to look down the other set of stairs.
Megan?
That voice. That was my sister's voice. It was unmistakable, even with the echo, and she was the only one in my family who called me Maxie, rather than just Max, like everyone else.
Megan, are you down there?
I waited a beat. Maybe I had imagined it. Why the hell would my sister be here? But then,
Maxie, I'm here.
the voice was definitely my sister's, and it was definitely coming from the lower level of the factory. But it didn't make any sense. What would she be doing here? I hadn't told anyone I'd be coming here, unless she read my blog. Maybe I'd mentioned it in the last post that I'd be exploring the factory next, and for some reason she decided to come along too. But that meant she had gotten here before me, and I hadn't heard her leave the house, unless she'd been just as sneaky as me, but she was too young to be out here on her own.
Megan, you shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. Can you come and get me?
I sighed, shaking my head. Of course, I'm coming. I started to descend the stairs, but something made me pause. All the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Was this really my sister? Even when I tried to rationalize how she'd gotten here, it just didn't make any sense. How did she even know where the factory was? How did she manage to get inside? Unless she'd been the one to break the window, but surely she would have cut herself trying to climb over the glass shards. Nothing seemed to fit. And yet, the only thing I was certain of was that was my sister's voice. I had no doubt about it. It wasn't just some random child's voice. It was Megan's.
Megan? Can you come to me? I'm at the top of the stairs. It's dark, and I'm scared, she whimpered. Please, come and get me.
I knew something wasn't right, but the fear in her voice was evident. What if it was really Megan, and she was stuck down there? I couldn't just leave her, but I was reluctant to leave the safety of the main floor. Once I went down there, what if I got stuck too?
I can go get some help. No, Maxie, come and get me, please.
The desperation in her voice eventually swayed me, and I took the first step down into the darkness. My flashlight bounced off the wall at the end, where the stairs turned sharply to the left, but I couldn't see anything or hear anything beyond my own ragged breath. Megan, are you still alright?
Yes,
she said, her voice low.
But please hurry.
I know, I'm coming, I replied, reaching the turn in the stairs and shining my flashlight down to the bottom. A solid metal floor stretched on as far as I could see, but I couldn't see my sister.
Where are you?
I said. Can you step into the light? When she didn't reply, a speck of fear went through me.
Megan, can you see the bottom of my torch? I'm almost at the bottom of the stairs.
Still, no reply. My heart thundered in my chest. Where had she gone? She'd been talking to me fine just a minute ago, but now it was too silent. The unease from earlier returned tenfold, and I swallowed back a lump in my throat. I moved the flashlight left and right, trying to highlight more of the room below, but I couldn't see anything beyond metal pipes and grates in the floor. Something moved suddenly from the corner of my eyes, and I jerked the light towards it. A figure darted into the shadows around the room, just out of sight.
Megan, is that you?
When she still didn't reply, I began to get a bad feeling about what was waiting for me down at the bottom. I started to doubt that it was my sister down there at all, but something else. Something masquerading as her. I didn't know how it was possible for someone else to mimic her voice. Never mind knowing my name. What I did know was that if it was really my sister down there, then she wouldn't be hiding in the shadows where I couldn't see her. Before anything else could happen, I turned and began making my way back up the stairs. It was time to leave. It was time to go home and make sure that Megan was still tucked in bed, fast asleep.
Maxie, wait, don't go.
I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand. That wasn't Megan's voice. Not anymore. That hard edge, the insistence. Megan never spoke like that. As much as I wanted to bolt out of there, for some reason, I couldn't move. Goose flesh rose all along my arms and neck, and I felt my hair stand on end. Something was standing behind me. If I turned around with my flashlight, I would see it. I'd see what had pretended to be my sister, what had tried to trick me into going down there. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't move forward either. I was stuck, facing the stairs up to my escape, with danger resting on my laurels. Yet, I still couldn't move. I couldn't do anything.
Maxie.
The voice sang, no longer pretending to be my sister. It was strangely wet, guttural, like someone trying to speak with a mouthful of water. It made my whole body go cold. The flashlight almost trembled out of my numb fingers.
Maxie, you're not leaving already, are you?
What the hell was this thing? It didn't sound human, not anymore. It sounded like a crude imitation of a human voice, missing something vital. How had I ever thought it was my sister speaking?
Maxie, I've been waiting for you.
I finally shook myself free of my stupor, taking a languid step forward. The thing behind me let out a low, animalistic growl.
Where do you think you're going?
Something shifted in the air behind me, and I started to run up the stairs, just as something ghosted my back, tearing through the material of my shirt. I flew up the rest of the stairs, back into the factory, and ran straight through the storage room, which I'd entered. I didn't look back once. I had no idea if it was following me, but I couldn't hear it. Nevertheless, I didn't want to give it a chance to catch up, so I didn't stop running until I was inside the room with the door shut behind me. Then I pulled a stack of boxes in front of the handle to wedge it shut. I paused for a moment, doubling over with my hands on my knees, the flashlight pointed down at my feet, trying to recover my breath from that mad dash.
Maxie, where did you go?
Cursing and wheezing under my breath, I scrambled back through the broken window, the shards of glass nicking the skin of my arm. As soon as I was outside, gulping in the night air, I could no longer hear the voice. Whatever it was hadn't followed me out. I couldn't stop shaking as I ran home, slamming the front door instead of climbing back through my window. My parents answered in bewilderment, but I rushed straight past them and headed up to my sister's room. As soon as I barged in, I let out a sob of relief. Megan sat up in bed, staring at me with blurry eyes. "Maxie, what's wrong?" she mumbled, climbing sleepily out of bed. Without saying anything, I rushed over and pulled her into a hug. I'd never been so glad to see her. I didn't know what I would have done if she hadn't been there. But that still left me with more questions than answers. Who had been in the factory? And how had they known about me and Megan? None of it made sense, and I would have thought I had imagined it all. If it wasn't for what I saw later that night, when I changed out of my clothing, 2 jagged tears through my shirt, where something had tried to grab me. It was just a few minutes past midnight when Anna felt his presence. She had felt it plenty of times before, but never that strong. Anna's bones trembled as ice-cold chills began to travel through her entire body. She shivered in her bed and clutched her handmade quilt around herself more tightly in an attempt to find even the smallest bit of warmth. Death was near. Anna was sure of that. She'd been tracking him for years, and even managed to spare a few people from his morbid touch. Though she'd never clearly seen him, she's had the ability to sense him for as long as she could remember. Anna braved the cold, as she slipped out of bed quickly when her nose caught a familiar scent. It was his scent. Any time he was near, she always smelled the same aroma, cinnamon laced with something similar to sulfur. Anna quickly tied her cotton bathrobe around herself as she slid on her fuzzy house slippers. Cracking open the door to her room, she cautiously peered out into the hallway. Things were dim and quiet, besides the loud ticking of an antique grandfather clock on the wall. All seemed calm otherwise, but an intense and eerie feeling of dread surrounded her. Anna quietly stepped into the hall and softly made her way towards her mother's room to check on her. She had been having chest pains the night before, so that put Anna on alert ever since. Turning the handle that led to her mother's room, her pulse quickened. The sense of dread she had felt intensified, and now almost overwhelmed her. With her fingertips planted firmly on the doorknob, she twisted it and began to pull the door open. As she did, she was intensely hit with the strong smell of cinnamon and the pungent odor of sulfur. The scent hit her nostrils like a freight train, and was so overpowering to her senses, she almost retched. Anna swallowed the urge down and pushed her way onward regardless. There, in the dim light of her mother's lamp, the sight before her caused her to freeze in place as a sharp gasp escaped her lips. There he stood, at the foot of her mother's bed, in all his deathly glory. Anna felt glued to the floor as her eyes scanned the dark, horrific figure before her. Her heart then hammered in her chest with such force it felt like it would burst her ribcage. All the words and verbal sounds left her body as she stared at him. He was tall, but not freakishly tall, like she'd always imagined him to be. He kept his back turned to her, but she knew that he was more than aware of her presence. Anna took a few quick seconds to observe the parts of him she could see. His body was cloaked in a floor-length leather coat that was a deep shade of coal in color. Matching boots adorned his feet, but she noticed a peculiar design on the buckle of each one. It was tough for her to see clearly with such little light in the room, but the buckle had a skull etched into it. Anna swallowed hard as the figure slowly turned and gazed at her. Her mouth fell agape instantly, as her whole being felt like it could collapse in terror at the sheer sight of him. His pants and shirt were also black beneath his coat. His raven hair was semi-long, but on the top of his head, the rest was clipped short. He looked practically human, except his eyes. They were blacker than the darkest nights, like if they were two gaping holes instead. They gave away in no motion, and were unworldly to look at, as they sat atop his high and defined cheekbones. His face was pale and void of expression. Anna felt as if she would choke on the lump that was stuck in her throat. Her fear had escalated, as he stood silently and unmoving, while he continued to peer in her direction. Her eyes flickered anxiously to her mother's form in the bed behind him. She was so far away that she couldn't tell if her mother was still breathing or still alive at all. Anna's lips frantically attempted to form words to call out to her mother, but it was as if they were sewn completely shut. No sound radiated through the room, besides the erratic beating of her own heart. As if on cue, the figure spoke in a deep and unnatural voice and said,
To answer the impending question in your mind, yes, she's alive. For now.
Anna's body began to convulse with uncontrollable fright and panic. Not only could he read her mind, but she automatically knew deep in her soul that he was there to take her mother's life. It was only then that the terrible realization brought courage back into her being. She'd be damned if she'd let him take her mother. Anna's hands balled into fists as she glared daggers silently at the ominous being in front of her. His originally slack, thin lips curled to an evil grin of amusement in her direction.
That can be arranged.
He stated, followed by a deep, abrupt chuckle that radiated through the walls and caused them to silently quake. Even though he was extremely frightening, Anna wasn't afraid to die for the ones that she loved most. She never feared death itself, but was instead afraid of losing her loved ones to death. She addressed him in her mind and said, "Fine, take me instead. I'm willingly offering to take her place." The figure Anna knew as death stood in silence for a moment. He took a few steps towards her until he stood mere inches from her body. He started to circle her, all while he said nothing. She held her breath and fought against her fear with every ounce of strength she could pull from within. His presence was so intense, so overwhelming. Being so close to him made her feel like the world was going to cave in, and that he was somehow sucking the very life from her soul just by standing next to her. As he paced around Anna, he sniffed the air several times. He could smell the fear as it saturated the air that surrounded her, like that of a thick fog. He could sense the way she tried to mask her fear, and that fact alone gave him more satisfaction. He was in fact death after all. He enjoyed instilling terror in the hearts of the living. It was not only something cruel he enjoyed, it was his job, his very purpose. Anna forced her eyes open as he finally went and stopped in front of her. A wicked smile formed on his face as he teased.
How sweet. But things don't exactly work like that, darling.
The tone and way he said,
Darling,
sent a shiver down her spine faster than any bolt of lightning. Only her deceased grandmother had been the one to call her that in such a fashion. Anna quickly realized that he was toying with her purposefully. He'd actually got joy out of the torment he made her feel. She straightened her stance and held her head up high and voiced, "You can torment and deceive me all you want, but I'm not letting you take my mother. She's a good woman who makes a difference in so many lives. I refuse." Just when Anna didn't think it was any more possible, the room grew even colder. She could see her own breath right in front of her very eyes as she exhaled. Death narrowed his solid black gaze at her and growled,
it is not up to you, you pathetic mortal. Now, if you will excuse me.
In a matter of seconds, he vanished from in front of Anna and hovered over her mother at the head of her bed. He then outstretched his pale, bony hand towards her. Anna watched the events in sheer and complete horror. She couldn't lose her mother, not after all she had already lost everyone else she had ever loved in the past. Everything seemed like it was moving in slow motion. All the while, Anna felt weighted to the floor. Without a second thought, a scream of panic mixed with determination ripped from her mouth as she ran from across the room. She grabbed his hand while he was mere inches from grasping the hand of her mother. Anna heard a series of deafening, unholy roars and growls as darkness clouded her vision. She couldn't hear anything and felt like the very wind was being sucked out of her. She blindly tumbled down what seemed like a dark, never-ending abyss. Suddenly, her vision came back to her. She found herself on a crimson shade of cobblestone brick. She writhed around frantically in pain as she gripped her right ear. Death stood a few feet from her, unconcerned. As he waited for the effects of the transition to wear off, he casually instructed,
Foolish human, stop struggling. It will only prolong the pain. And I have no time to waste on your pathetic afflictions.
Anna stilled herself on the ground and tried concentrating on her breathing for a few moments. She then waited. She then willed herself into a sitting position and tried to shake off how dizzy she felt. Her world was spinning and her brain felt rattled. She glanced up at Death and questioned, "What happened? Where am?" Death cut her off as he mocked,
What happened? Where am I?
He rolled his eyes in annoyance as he announced,
I know. I've heard the same questions over and over from thousands of people before you. To answer everything, you're dead. And this, my dear Anastasia, is purgatory.
"I'm not going to tell you what to believe about Mackenzie Weaver. At this point, I'm not even sure what to believe. I'll just tell you what I've heard and what I've seen. Then you can draw your own conclusions. Maybe you even know something I don't, and can help me figure it all out. I first heard about Mackenzie from a guy I knew back in college. I won't use his name here for, let's say, certain reasons. I didn't really talk to him a lot. He wasn't the kind of guy it's easy to have a conversation with. But he was definitely the kind of guy who would know about conspiracy theories or urban legends if he wanted to know about that kind of thing. I never did really, but he liked to talk to me anyways. I think we were sitting in the cafeteria, or it might have been in class one day, before the teacher showed up. Either way, he leaned over to me and asked if I had ever heard about Mackenzie Weaver. I said no, but I was already groaning on the inside. It was always something with this kid. Usually some tall tale about Stonehenge, or elves, or the airplane disasters. Nothing that quite fit with reality. I didn't listen very hard that day, but I got the gist of the story. Mackenzie Weaver was some girl who murdered a lot of people at her high school in Wyoming. The cops killed her when they showed up, but, and here's the kicker, people said they saw her up and about after the fact. I know. My first thought that he was trying to pull a real-life chain email on me. Forward this message to 20 friends, or Mackenzie Weaver will kill you in your sleep. Ooh! I think I might have said that to him, but maybe I didn't. This was a while ago, and I drank a lot in college. Either way, I ended up brushing him off, cause the probably made-up story of some girl going crazy and killing her classmates didn't seem that interesting to me. A couple of days later, we were at a party off campus when he mentioned it again. I was just trying to have a good time, smoke a little weed, and let off some steam about finals. But he started yanking my ear about this urban legend I didn't care about. He went off on about how Mackenzie Weaver had come back from the dead to finish the job, and how she was killing people from her old school. Eventually, I got pretty annoyed, and told him that even the non-supernatural parts of the story didn't make sense. Like, if a girl had shot up a school, even in some podunk town no one had ever heard of, it would have been on the news, and I don't remember ever hearing about a female school shooter. You can call me a pussy for this, but honestly, what he said next sent chills down my spine. It's not anything supernatural, so I guess I didn't have a reason not to believe him. But he told me Mackenzie's murder spree hadn't been a big deal in the media because it couldn't be twisted into a debate about gun control. She had killed her classmates with a sword. After he said that, I suddenly didn't feel like partying anymore. I don't know why. Maybe I felt sick picturing kids my age in the 21st century getting sliced to pieces with a sword. I went outside to have a cigarette, and the guy followed me. I didn't admit it to myself, but I was kind of glad he did. I guess I wanted to hear more about Mackenzie Weaver, even if I didn't believe everything he was saying. He said that Mackenzie was just some random girl from a small town, totally normal, and never hinted that she was going to kill anyone. I had originally guessed that Mackenzie was bullied, or brutalized, or molested, or anything that can cause people to snap. But according to my friend, she was just this kid. She had a few friends, even a boyfriend. Her parents were still married. I asked my friend how he knew all these details, and he said he had gotten them from someone who had gotten them from one of Mackenzie's old classmates. I don't know if that meant the story had been changed or diluted through the grapevine, but my friend promised me this version was accurate. Apparently, a few factors went into Mackenzie being virtually unknown. Part of it was that she was from a small town, and part of it was her parents tried to hush it up. But I think the most realistic explanation was that she was 17 when it happened. She wasn't a legal adult, so they didn't release her identity to the press, even after she was killed. According to my friend, the conspiracy theorist, basically, people like him started talking about Mackenzie the year after she died, when a few people turned up murdered around a college in Maine. It was hundreds of miles from where she had lived, but one of the people who died turned out to be her old boyfriend, and he was killed with a sharp weapon. I told my friend that couldn't have really happened, and he promised me he'd get me a digital copy of the newspaper article. He later told me that the article wasn't online anymore because the college had demanded it get taken down. That seemed awfully convenient at the time. So, that was the story. Some girl kills her friends with a sword and gets killed by the police. A year later, her boyfriend and a few other people get killed by an unknown murderer with a sword. Sure, it's suspicious, but is it enough to make me believe that Mackenzie Weaver came back to life? Not really. Doesn't matter how much I drink. I'm not going to start believing in killer zombies because of a coincidence. I was already back home in Rhode Island when my friend got in touch. It was just through Facebook, Nothing dramatic like him showing up on my doorstep. I hadn't really talked to him since school got out for the summer, but I also hadn't forgot how creeped out I felt thinking about Mackenzie. Even if she didn't come back to life, killing her friends with a sword was pretty disturbing. One day, I even searched her online, but I didn't really find anything besides a thread of some supernatural support website where they claimed Mackenzie had been seen somewhere in Ohio right before some young guy was killed. That freaked me out for a second. Then I remembered that there was absolutely no proof whoever wrote this hadn't just made it up. Anyways, when my friend messaged me, it was about a new development in the story. According to a rumor passed around Mackenzie's hometown, she had actually been pregnant when she snapped. One of her old neighbors had heard something from her parents, who had heard something from her doctor. I guess her boyfriend, who had only 1 year to live at that point, had forgot to wear protection, and they made a baby. I mean, who knows how the boyfriend felt about it, if he even knew, but I know how I felt. It was just a rumor that was part of a story I only half believed, but I felt like I was going to throw up when I read my friend's message. She was a mom, maybe not legally, and maybe the baby was just a single cell at that point, but the idea of a pregnant girl killing people and getting killed herself was too much for me to handle right then. I didn't want to think about Mackenzie, but something kept me glued to my computer screen when he told me about another rumor that had come out of the main killings. A couple of people claimed they had seen a girl with long blonde hair, which is what Mackenzie had. He assured me, wandering around town, wearing a mask. The mask part was almost enough to make me go back to not believing. But I heard him out. It was something called a tank splatter mask. French tank operators wore them during World War I. Unlike Mackenzie Weaver, tank splatter masks did get me some results online. They were made out of leather and had these slatted eyes, while everything under the nose was covered in chainmail. I guess they were used to deflect shrapnel while operating tanks. No apparent connection to Mackenzie, but I have to admit that if I was a serial killer, I'd wear one too, just for the aesthetic. Maybe I sound like a little kid, and I guess it was weird I got this emotional online, but I wanted to know. I asked my friend if he was serious about Mackenzie Weaver, if he specifically believed she had come back from the dead. He told me he didn't know, which was probably the most down-to-earth thing he ever said, but he ruined it by admitting that the thought terrified him. I tried to ignore the weird, scared feeling I got whenever we talked about Mackenzie. I tried to go on with my summer vacation. At one point, I went out with some friends. While they were trying and failing to pick up women, they wanted me to join, and I wanted to join too. I have always been pretty good with women, but for some reason, every time I looked at a girl, I pictured her wearing one of those terrifying masks, wielding a bloody sword with an undead fetus kicking in her stomach. For more than a couple of nights, I ended up lying awake, telling myself how fucking stupid it was to be scared of something that couldn't be more than an urban myth, like an adult version of a campfire story. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it seemed to make. People come back to life all the time, didn't they? Some medical procedures even involve stopping people's hearts and restoring them a while later. That was technically death and rebirth. So maybe the details of Mackenzie's demise was just exaggerated. Maybe she died, maybe she hadn't. Maybe she was still out there, maybe she wasn't. For some reason, the most common occurring thought I had was about Mackenzie and myself. I kept picturing what I would do if I ever met Mackenzie, or if she might have any reason to kill me. All the theories regarding her boyfriend made it seem like she was only out to get those classmates. She didn't kill while she was alive. But what if that wasn't the rule? What if she showed up at my house one day and stabbed me through the heart? What if she was out on a random killing spree to make others suffer for her own death and the death of her unborn child? I hate to admit it, but that was around the time I started sleeping with the lights on. My friend and I talked about Mackenzie a lot. It was like a drug. I knew it was bad for me to keep thinking about her, but somehow I couldn't stop. I wanted to know more. There weren't many details to know, but what there was, I wanted. Then, one day he appeared at my house. It was late at night, and I was lying awake with a single lamp on, giving just enough light so I wasn't mortified that someone would appear in my room. I heard a small plinking sound. I felt my heart jump out of my chest. I told myself it was just an animal or something in the house. I had almost convinced myself when the sound came again, then a third time, then a fourth. On the last time, I saw something moving outside and realized what it was. A classic rom-com scenario, someone throwing pebbles at my window. Of course, the first thought that went through my head was that it was Mackenzie Weaver, here to kill me for some goddamn reason or another. I ran through every possible outcome in a split second before finally telling myself it was probably a regular person down there. I was pretty surprised to see my friend out the window. I couldn't remember where he was from, if I ever even knew, but I was pretty sure it was far away. I also couldn't see how he'd known which room was mine, but I'm guessing it's because I had the only light on in the house. I whispered yelled down to him, asking what the hell he wanted at 2 in the morning. He whispered yelled back that I had to come down and that it was urgent. I shut the window and went down the stairs, trying to keep quiet. Every split second, I had a new Mackenzie-related theory about why he was here. When I got outside, I asked him what was going on. He told me I had to come with him and not to ask questions. We walked a few hundred yards down the road to where he had stashed his car and got in. My parents were always pretty relaxed. They wouldn't explode if they knew I was gone. Anyways, my curiosity was the most important thing right now. We were cruising through the neighborhood, just about at the speed limit. I remember it being really quiet out. It almost felt supernaturally quiet. I asked my friend what was going on, and he asked me if I believed in Mackenzie Weaver. I swear, I felt my heart skip a beat. I already knew this was about Mackenzie. I could feel it in my gut. But when he said her name, well, it was the first time in months I had heard it out loud. If anyone asked, I was still officially on the fence. But I was terrified of her, real or fiction. For the sake of argument, I wanted to say yes. Yes, I believe in Mackenzie Weaver. Yes, I believe that she came back to life and killed her boyfriend a year later. Yes, I believe she's still out there waiting to finish what she started. What actually came out of my mouth was an, I don't know. My friend nodded. He looked disappointed, sad, or something I couldn't read. This made me feel regretful for some reason, as if I had said something insulting to him. I suddenly wanted to lie and make him feel better. I had to remind myself that a half a year earlier, I had barely considered that man a friend. As he drove, my friend kept glancing into his rearview mirror. I couldn't tell why. There was no one else on the streets, but something whispered in the back of my head that I already knew what he's looking for. Who he was looking for. "Can I trust you?" he asked. Yes, I replied. I didn't know why he asked this, or if I was telling the truth, but for some reason, I wanted to please him. I felt sorry for him. I saw a brief flash of memory behind my eyes. Being 10 years old, watching my grandmother wither away from cancer, having my mom tell me I needed to be nice to Grandma because she was going to die soon. My friend slammed on the brake, and I almost hit my head on the dashboard. "She's here," he said. "How?" I replied, hearing the words come out of my mouth. My brain wasn't working. He shook his head slowly. "Don't ask how," he said. Something like a memory fluttered in my head, and I heard myself saying, "It's supposed to be her classmates." My friend almost responded, but then he looked down at the floor. "Just remember," he said. Then he opened the door and stepped out. There was a wet sound, a sound I didn't recognize, a sound I was wondering about, until the moment I saw the blade sticking through his chest. For a second, I couldn't move. Then, with blood rushing in my ears, I yanked on my door handle, tore off my seatbelt, and fell to the car. My knees scraped the asphalt as I scrambled onto the sidewalk, then onto the grass, then stood up and tore down the side road. My legs pumped against the ground, my heart hammered in my chest, but it wasn't until my lungs threatened to burst that I stopped for a breath. I don't know why I did it, but somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part of every human brain that begs to confront its fear, I told myself to turn around. I couldn't see my friend, but I could see his blood. It ran down the curved blade, pouring off and puddling on the street. She wore a leather jacket, also stained in red. On her face was a leather and chainmail mask the slatted eyes staring directly at me. A shaft of blonde hair fell over her shoulders, almost letting me pretend she was human. But then I saw it, almost glowing in the moonlight, molted the hideous shade of death flesh, the bullet wound across her scalp, a souvenir of the day she was killed. I don't remember a lot of things that night, at least what happened after I got home. I remember the papers, though, from my town, and then from his. They said he was murdered, and that there weren't any suspects. And why would there be? Nobody knew he was in Rhode Island. Nobody knew anyone who would want to hurt him. But I did. I do. I knew a young woman who was perfectly willing to stick a cutlass through his chest. Was it really Mackenzie Weaver, back from the dead? Possibly. Was it someone posing as her, trying to finish what Mackenzie started? Maybe. Is there any perfectly reasonable explanation for all this? Somehow I doubt it. For the most part, I've recovered from what has happened. Of course, I couldn't see a therapist about it, not without being committed, so I've learned to cope on my own. Somehow, I found that the best way to get over it is to fully accept what happened, or what I believe happened. This past summer, a year after my friend's death, I took a road trip out to Mackenzie's hometown. I couldn't tell you exactly why, just that I thought it would help with my healing process. Either that, or it'd make me want to do something that wouldn't be great for my mental health, but could help a lot of people. Hunting down Mackenzie, for instance. After all, 147 of her classmates are still alive. I checked. As I expected, the Wyoming town was small, quaint, with nothing too interesting going on. This could have easily been my imagination, but I almost felt like there was something just beneath the surface of everything I saw. Some kind of elephant in the room that they had all agreed not to discuss with outsiders. Had they all made a vow to pretend Mackenzie never existed? Did any of them even know the rumors that she had come back to life? I spent the first day there, just wandering around, taking in the small town vibe. I had rented a hotel the night before, but hadn't gotten much sleep. Every time I drifted off, I saw my friend with a cutlass through his heart, or those slated leather eyes, somehow more expressive and more evil than any real ones had ever been. Around noon, I stepped into a small coffee house and ordered something to drink. I entertained myself with my usual time killer searching for Mackenzie sightings online. They were slightly more frequent than they had been the summer before, but I knew she hadn't reached national attention yet. When I finally worked up the nerve, I asked the barista, obviously a local, about Mackenzie. I swore to him I wasn't a journalist or a police. Still, he didn't look happy to hear the name. Of course not. In a town like this, anyone who's known for disturbing their idyllic peace would be demonized, even if they didn't return from the dead. Without a word, the barista tore off a scrap of register paper and wrote something down. He handed the note to me, and I read a name in tight cursive, Elms Grove Cemetery. I thanked him. He didn't reply. When I finally got to the cemetery, I spent the better part of an hour looking for her. But when I finally found her grave, I was surprised I hadn't seen it earlier. The grass before her headstone was newer than the rest, and there were marks on the ground like someone had been digging and someone else was too afraid to fix it. I swallowed my fear and stepped forward. The grave did belong to Mackenzie Weaver. From March 5th, 1995 to February 14th, 2013. There was nothing special about the stone, nothing that indicated magic powers to rise from the dead. What made me crouch over either a dead body or empty casket were the words, written in rough, spray-painted letters across her headstone. I won't need to paraphrase here, because the following lines have become more ingrained in my memory than my own name. Though the grave couldn't keep her, and her soul wouldn't leave her, we still hear the cries of Mackenzie Weaver. Though some would forget her, while others still grieve her, there's proof in the blade of Mackenzie Weaver. My warning to you, don't forget, but believe her. You'll all be the prey of Mackenzie Weaver. Everyone says that right before you die, you flash back on your life up till that point. They say this flashback takes a fraction of a second, but that's all you need to remember everything you've experienced and come to terms with the fact that you won't be experiencing anything anymore, ever again. I wonder, is there any way to prove this pre-death flashback really occurs? And in a more philosophical sense, if it can be proved, does it even matter? I say it matters, to me at least, because I'd prefer to believe that Rose wasn't forced to relive her darkest moments before it all ended. When I knew her, Rose Williams was 20 years old, slim but gained weight, her jet black hair grown into her natural blonde at the roots. She wore thick glasses when she didn't care, contacts when she did. Rose was a Midwestern girl, but she didn't want to be. She walked, talked, and acted like a Rich Valley girl, whose existence was defined by which flavor of LaCroix she was drinking. I believed the act too, at least till I heard she was from Wyoming. When Rose turned 18, she did what her friends and family expected. She moved as far away from Wyoming as possible. This took the form of attending an insignificant community college in Ohio. Probably her last choice, but the only one that accepted her. Everyone figured she'd have her pick of schools after playing the sympathy card, but it turned out most colleges didn't want the drama of a student struggling through PTSD. And she was, even if she didn't know it, struggling with PTSD. That is, because Rose was part of a high school class that gave birth to the urban legend known as Mackenzie Weaver. Back when Rose and I met, the name didn't mean anything to me, or the general public. We didn't have all the documentaries and memes and Halloween costumes centered around her that you'll see nowadays. I didn't see so much as a Facebook post when Mackenzie allegedly dug herself up from the grave, and it didn't make national news when her boyfriend was murdered on the anniversary of her massacre. By the time Rose and I were friends, we shared a Spanish class where she was the only student I could actually stand. I won't get into the poor life choices that led to me also enrolling at a mediocre community college in Ohio, because that story isn't half as interesting or horrifying as hers. I got to campus late February 15th, 2014, and found Rose sitting outside on one of the pockmarked wooden benches the administration didn't feel like replacing. She was wearing sweatpants and glasses, which I knew meant she hadn't planned on trying today. But the fact that she was outside, smoking, while class went on without her, told me there was something else going on. "Hey, what's up?" I said, stopping by her bench. I knew I was late, but there was still time to argue against being marked absent.
"What's up?"
She repeated, not looking up at me, a lit cigarette forgotten in her other hand. I was silent for a moment, giving her a chance to actually acknowledge me, but she kept reading whatever was on her screen in silence. Her leg was bouncing with nervous energy. "What's up?" I said again. Then, "Hey!" Finally, she looked up at me. And for a second, I didn't know what I was seeing. Her eyes usually jittered with excitement at any proposal. Her eyes were wide and empty, overflowing with what I could only identify as some part fear, some part sadness. She wasn't crying, at least not literally. I could sense tears behind her eyes, a non-physical manifestation of whatever she was experiencing. Are you okay?" I asked, taken aback. I hardly recognized her without that glint of mischief in her eyes, the smirk she would flash before stealing someone's cigarettes out of their purse or blocking a one-night stand's phone number.
"Yeah."
She breathed. She couldn't have sounded less convincing. "What's that?" I nodded to her phone.
"Just Facebook."
"Rose," I said, and waited till she looked me in the eyes again. "What is the matter?" She looked down at her phone, then silently handed it to me. What I saw was a lengthy Facebook post written by the police department of a town I'd never heard of. But the post didn't make any sense, at least not as I skimmed its contents. They were talking about a murderer, but also grave robbing. The word sword appeared once or twice, and I couldn't imagine how that possibly fit in with modern-day police reports. What is this?" I asked.
"Just read it."
She murmured, and I caught her implication. She couldn't or wouldn't explain it aloud. The post, of course, was about Mackenzie Weaver, about the murder of her old boyfriend. But the cops didn't know that, and I sure as hell didn't either. The actual post was an unofficial admission that there had been a string of murders somewhere, and that the culprit had not been apprehended. The victims were unconnected, and most of them killed with a sharp weapon too big to be a knife. It was a disturbing story, but I couldn't see why it had affected Rose so much. "Did you know one of them?" I asked, handing her back the phone. She seemed to remember she was holding a now spent cigarette and dropped it on the ground. Lighting a new one with shaking fingers, I was definitely going to be marked absent.
Not really.
She said, as if that explained everything. "So, you knew one of them a little bit?" I asked.
I can't talk about it right now.
She said, in no way implying she would ever be able to talk about it. "Okay," I offered lamely. She was obviously freaked out for some reason or another, but I couldn't offer a solution or even support her if she wasn't going to explain. "Wanna talk about something else?"
Just go inside.
She said, then, as if trying to cover up for her brusqueness,
I'll see you after class?
"Yeah," I replied, and left it at that. I didn't see her for the rest of the day, and silently accepted that she'd only asked to get rid of me. There was a lump in my throat as I pushed through my homework, maybe stupidly, since there was apparently nothing wrong with her, but I was worried, and hindsight being 2020, I should have been a lot more worried than I was. When I saw Rose again 2 days later, she looked even worse. She usually didn't put a lot of effort into her appearance. We had that in common, but that day, I could tell at a glance she was depressed, or at least in a very bad headspace. She was in class, but only physically. I must have been very dehydrated, being that she kept drinking out of an opaque bottle that I could only assume was full of nice refreshing water. I must have asked her if she was okay again, because I distinctly remember her hitting me with that classic,
Yes, I'm fine.
It wasn't until a couple days later that I worked up the nerve to ask her what was going on, and if I could do anything to help. She responded with about as much annoyance as I expected, but apparently couldn't keep it to herself anymore, because she finally told me.
You know about school shootings?
Was how she phrased it. "Yes," I said. I did know about school shootings. I lived in America my entire life. I know about school shootings.
Something like that happened to me.
She continued.
Last year, this girl at my school, she...
"Jesus Christ," I said, after her voice had trailed off. We were standing in her apartment kitchen, and she was slumped against the fridge as she spoke.
It wasn't a gun.
She said quickly.
It was like a sword. But like one of those curved ones.
"A cutlass?" I supplied. She nodded.
This girl,
Her voice choked off, and it took a second for her to get the name out.
Mackenzie, she just, like, lost her shit one day and killed some of my friends. And then the cops got her.
She shrugged and looked away, as though I was supposed to think she didn't care all that much. The apartment seemed colder than it had a minute ago, as I considered what she was saying. I didn't know about Mackenzie back then, and I'd never heard this side of Rose's high school experience. But now that I thought about it, I should have at least seen that she was hanging on to something. She had a cat, a little brown thing named Lexi, who she'd carried right into Spanish class a couple of times with no argument from the professor. I realize now that Lexi was an emotional support animal, and that some days Rose would think too hard about Spanish class and remember a particular murderous blonde she had Spanish with the year before. That, plus the way Rose would sometimes shut off. We'd be out in Findlay, sneaking into bars and seeing concerts when she would go silent and still. Sometimes it would take me a few minutes to notice, but when I did, she would write it off as suddenly losing a caffeine rush. I'd never thought twice about Rose's smoking habit, but after finding out the truth, I had to wonder if she picked it up as a way to ground herself after what happened. "So then," I began after a minute, hoping I wasn't phrasing the question in an offensive way. I mean, you've been particularly affected recently, right? How does that... A new thought occurred to me. Is it the anniversary?
That's part of it,
She admitted.
but not all of it.
Then, what is it? I asked. She shot me a look, and I couldn't tell if I was annoying her, threatening to bring back the memories she tried to bury, but she answered the question.
That Facebook post I was reading?
The one about the murders?
Yeah. A week ago. That was her.
Something twisted in my gut. I knew I'd misunderstood, that she technically hadn't said Mackenzie died. But for a split second there, as her words echoed in my ears, I almost allowed myself to believe the other possibility, the impossible, that my mind had jumped to. I cleared my throat. When you said the cops got her,
Yeah.
she interrupted.
They killed her. They killed her. Okay? They shot her in the head. They buried her. Then a few months later, someone dug her up.
I somehow managed to stumble on my feet. Though I'd been standing still, Rose was looking away from me, watching Lexi step weightlessly around the kitchen counter. For the first time, I wondered if she was going to hurt me.
But no one really dug her up.
Rose continued, her voice a bitter monotone.
They didn't catch anyone, and all the dirt was pushed to both sides of the grave, like someone was going out, not in.
Rose, I said, and for a second, I couldn't think of how to continue. That's... no offense, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
She shot back.
I thought so too when I heard about it, but then I asked my psychic about it.
I was almost relieved at the grounded reference. Rose and I had been arguing off and on about her psychic for the better part of 4 months. After signing away my freshman year into a near indentured friendship with her, I'd found out she was one of those middle-class white girls who paid an old woman with an accent an obscene amount of money to tell them they would have good fortune in upcoming months. She believed her psychic more than I'd ever known a Catholic to believe in the Pope. I tried to tell her she couldn't believe in precognition while writing off all religion as outdated superstition, but she would always tell me to stop challenging her belief and kept shelling out her parents' money to some lady wearing a fake turban in a dark basement. Rose, I said, knowing I was treading on thin ice, you can't believe...
Yeah.
She jumped in.
I do believe it. I believe what she says, and that she said Mackenzie was back to finish what she started.
She's just playing off what you're afraid of, I retorted. That's what they do. That's how they make their money.
No, she's not.
Rose shot back.
'Cause I didn't tell her Mackenzie's name.
That simple statement, spoke in my friend's typical indignant tone, hung in the air like secondhand smoke. I crossed my arms against the cold and against the shadows. She could have researched you, I muttered, hardly loud enough for myself to hear. I was pulling at straws. There was no real argument to be made, other than that Rose was lying, and maybe she was. But that would just mean she was desperate to prove herself right.
She's back.
Rose said, not bothering to counter my point.
She's gonna try and kill everyone she missed.
Back then, I couldn't picture Mackenzie Weaver. I didn't know her preference for the tank splatter mask, or the way the bullet wound was still visible across her skull. Back then, when I heard my best friend talking about an undead teenager coming back to murder her, all I could picture were dark, twisted images, like some ethereal comic book in my head. A black, impressionist landscape, twisted trees, and crosses bearing bloody gods reaching towards the skies, weeping dark rain. And at the center of it all, bending all nature's laws around her to slip through the cracks, a small girl with skin white as bone, inky blood drooling down a skull with no face as she pulled herself back to the surface of the earth and into the world of the living. She had escaped hell, and she wouldn't return unless she dragged 149 souls down with her. The moving images, my rebellious mind's interpretation of Mackenzie's resurrection, was playing on a loop in my head as I drove home that night. I never thought I could feel afraid in my car, knowing there was a ton and a half of steel and glass between me and the rest of the world. But Mackenzie, or my image of her, wasn't some panhandling hobo or wild animal. It was something else entirely, something out of this world. As long as that drive home seemed, with every tree branch looking like a rusty cutlass, and every pothole like a tunnel up from Hades, it didn't take long for me to stop thinking about Mackenzie Weaver. Rose apparently adjusted to living with her psychic's predictions, though I figured she secretly knew it was bullshit. If Mackenzie was a force of the supernatural, she could have killed Rose a long time ago. I wondered a couple times what made Rose think the murders on the other side of the country were committed by her dead classmate. Eventually, I decided she had known the victim that died 19 years old, that I now know used to be Mackenzie's boyfriend. Then I found myself wondering for the first time why Mackenzie had snapped in the first place. Had someone done something to her? Why would she hold a grudge against Rose, living or undead? I wanted to ask her, but I couldn't bring myself to dredge it up again. Plus, Rose and I were hanging out less and less as the year pushed on. By May, I found a new group in Spanish class, and she had resigned herself to silently working in the back of the room, headphones on, and fingers twitching nervously in the absence of a cigarette. On the last day of school, Rose wasn't even in class. I showed up late and dicked around with the guys, knowing at this point our grades were locked in. I had finally finished freshman year, 9 months of confusing classes, and calling my parents for advice on the most basic adult functions. I was halfway through my community college career, and halfway through college in general. I was feeling good, free, and grown up. As I left my last class and checked my phone, I should have expected a text from Rose. A couple weeks into our first semester, just after we'd met, she had lent me a chair from her apartment. Mine was totally unfurnished, hence me sleeping on a bare mattress for 9 months, while hers came with 3 chairs, which she claimed was more than the number of people she ever wanted in her apartment at once. Now it was time for a safety deposit check, and her landlord wasn't the type who would fail to notice a disappearing chair. I had planned on tracking down an older friend of mine and asking if he'd buy us some celebratory booze, but I decided to put it off. Rose had been my best friend, even if we barely spoke anymore, and the least I could do was give her her chair back. So I loaded the chair in my car and drove over to her place. She lived on the second floor of a 2-story house, and I knew she wouldn't offer to help me carry the thing. So I lugged it up to the exterior landing and texted her to come out. A minute passed, then another, then 5. It wasn't unusual for Rose to keep me waiting. One time, she'd invited me to dinner, then ghosted me for 3 hours, and gotten pissed when I ate without her. But she was specifically waiting to get her chair back. The interaction would solely benefit her. It was her favorite kind of interaction. I waited for 10 minutes on the deck, texting her every 2. I sent her an ultimatum, claiming I would leave her chair out here to get rained on if she didn't open the door. But I knew I was talking out of my ass. Rose had me conditioned to dread her wrath in any situation where she felt she'd been affronted. Whether or not she was in the wrong, even knowing I wouldn't see her for 3 months, I couldn't stand the idea of having her turn the cap locks on. It took me an embarrassing long time to realize the door was unlocked, and when I did, something ticked in the back of my head. She could have forgotten on her way out or in, but Rose would never have left the door unlocked on purpose. I called her name, stepping in. When she didn't answer, I went ahead and dragged the chair inside. She would be mad that I went inside without her express permission, but it was better than waiting all day to do her a favor. There was music playing as I pushed a chair into her one-man living room. Baby, It's Cold Outside by Dean Martin. A weird choice for mid-June, but honestly, I've always loved the tune. I looked around the living room. No Rose to be seen. Alright, I decided. I'd give her one last chance via the original form of mass communication. The one my generation has totally abandoned, despite being easier and more personal than texting or tweeting, or whatever the hell else we're doing nowadays. She didn't pick up, which didn't surprise me, but I felt a spark of hope before I realized the voice on the other end was just a voicemail.
Hey, it's Rose.
She said, and I didn't know it was the last time I'd ever hear her voice.
Leave a message if you want, or just text me, because it's way easier.
I hung up, knowing she wouldn't listen to a voicemail, and that I wouldn't know what to say in a voicemail anyways. Might as well get out of here, I figured. She had the chair, she had a few months of my life, she had some serious issues she needed to work through, preferably without the help of her psychic and conspiracy theories. I turned to go, but stopped. Something had moved in my periphery, and I turned to look directly into a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Lexi was sitting on the kitchen counter, staring directly at me, her fluffy brown tail dipping back and forth in time with some meter I couldn't hear. The background music changed to Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. What is it? I asked the cat, feeling her slit eyes on me like a pair of microscopic lenses. Keeping eye contact, I almost felt rebellious against the cat, like I knew she was on some higher level of being, and I was an insignificant little organism in a petri dish. She wasn't just watching, she was observing. And then, I won the staring contest. Lexi turned in a half circle and hopped off the other side of the counter, into a small part of the apartment abruptly designated the kitchen. Maybe I was curious, or maybe I was bored, or maybe I just knew my place as one of the lesser minds in a petri dish, but either way, I walked around the counter in time to see Lexi turning in a circle 3 times, apparently finding the most comfortable position, before sitting down for a nap and the pool of blood congealing on Rose's shirt. I somehow forgot my immediate reaction to seeing my friend like that, collapsed on the floor, her head bent at an uncomfortable angle against the lower cupboard. I must have blacked out, or experienced a moment of severe disassociation, because by the time I fully recognized the dried blood on Rose's chin, the slash marks through her shirt, and the blood soaking into Lexi's fur, the song had changed. Last Christmas, I gave you my heart, but the very next day, you gave it away. I didn't want to look away. I didn't want to turn my back on that horror, knowing that in this new world, this new universe I allowed myself to accept, without any sort of evidence, there was no reason to believe Rose wouldn't stand up and take her revenge on the so-called friend who had let her slip away after discussing her dark past. But I had to look away. I had to track the brown cat as she seemed to wake up, slunk off the body of her owner, stepping past me with confidence in her stride, and wrapping herself snake-like in and around the dead girl's combat boots. The other dead girl, that is. Same as in the hellish images that my mind had drawn before, Mackenzie Weaver had no face. Whether human features existed, or her undead skull, I couldn't tell. But the face she chose, the avatar or whatever remained of a soul, still clung to her, was hard leather and chainmail, expressionless, emotionless, representing a body driven not by a brain, but the abstract concept of vengeance. Vengeance for what? What had Rose done to her? Did it matter? I stood there, frozen, staring into the slitted holes that functioned as her eyes. The bullet wound that ended her life was visible in the molted white skin above her mask. Pink and festering, but not bleeding, never bleeding. Blood begets life, and Mackenzie had neither. But Rose had blood, blood that was spilling out of her chest, blood that I could see running down the curved blade of Mackenzie's cutlass and dripping into Lexi's fur. We were 4 feet apart. I was close enough to my friend's killer that I could have seen the rise and fall of her breath, could have felt the slight human shifting and warmth of her body heat. I never realized until I stared a living corpse in the face how obnoxiously alive humans really are. But for Mackenzie, there was nothing, no breath, no warmth, not the slightest movement. She stood there, my friend's blood running over her glove, and she didn't move. And then she turned and left the apartment. The blood trailed after her, but she didn't seem to care. She walked out onto the upper deck and down the stairs, disappearing from my sight and not bothering to shut the door. It took a long time for me to convince the police that I hadn't killed Rose, especially since, back then, Back then, there wasn't the unspoken acceptance among law enforcement that Mackenzie's old classmates would continue to die, and the killer would continue to get away free. Rose Williams was Mackenzie's first victim after her boyfriend and the ensuing spree, the first death to imply that there would be more down the line. Well, she did always consider herself a trendsetter. I guess it isn't so much your life flashes before your eyes, as is a replay of the most intense moments. A greatest hits album of memories, as it were. A clip show of the joy, the terrifying, the gratuitous, and the murderous. I'm not surprised that Rose Williams popped into my head before anything else. So far, my life has been fairly average, both before and after June Day in 2014, so it makes sense that anything else wouldn't be worth flashing back on. But as I stand here, something like 2.5 years later, frozen in a single moment, unable to move or interact with my surroundings, I almost want to laugh. I never wanted any of this, Mackenzie, Rose, the supernatural elements of this world that average people will go so far to deny. I wanted to live a normal life, to grow up, to go to college, have a career, start a family. I didn't want it all to end before I hit 30, staring my own murderer in the face. My friends are too far away, and the music is too loud. I'm alone in this cramped space, in a compromised position, and the crowd outside is too drunk to care. I don't know if I'm supposed to feel at peace or overwhelming panic, but I feel neither. What I feel is confusion. I didn't lift a hand to stop her back then. I've never hurt her or insulted her. I've only tried to keep others from meeting the same fate as Rose. So why is she moving towards me? Why is she raising that cutlass to strike? Bullet holes riddle her clothing. A chunk has been taken out of her mask, exposing torn flesh and rotten bone beneath. She killed my friend. She's going to kill me. I wish my flashback could have lasted a few minutes longer.
Left to right, the pendulum swings. It swings and swings until you feel fright. Left to right, the pendulum swings as you beg and plead to get free from your plight. Left to right, the pendulum swings long, long until the night. Left to right, the pendulum swings as you beg and plead until there is no more fight. It is a sound that I heard as I opened my eyes. The room was cold and dark.
A faint dripping of water could be heard.
Where am I? And how the hell did I end up here? My eyes slowly adjusted to my environment. I attempted to get up, but I found that I am strapped down to something, and I cannot move. My heart rate quickens, but I calm myself down. If he wanted to hurt you, or for you to be dead, you would be so. Just stay calm and find a way out, I whispered to myself. Just as I finished reassuring myself, I could hear the slow, methodical footsteps of who I am sure is my captor. I knew this little trick. He is drawing up the game, trying to make me sweat in hopes of scaring me. Whatever he wants from me, he will not get. After a few long, tedious minutes, he finally walked down the stairs. I didn't wait for him to speak. Who are you? And what do you want? Shuttle games do not work on me, you half-wit. If you knew who I was, you would not be playing such games.
Oh, I know who I have, and trust me, what I have in store for you will make you beg for your life before the end,
He said in a cold and disinterested tone. I hear the flick of a light switch, and blinding white light comes on. As my eyes finally adjust, I can see what was causing the swooshing sounds. It was a massive pendulum that had a blade attached to it. He actually laughed. What the hell is that? That is a new one indeed. What do you think? We are in some fucking Saw movie? You gonna give me a way to escape so I can learn some big life lesson? Oh god, this is pretty fucking pathetic.
My would-be abductor came into the light, and I finally got to see the face of the person who made the ultimate mistake. Look, man, you don't know what you just stepped in. Suppose you let me go now, no harm, no foul. I will leave, and we can just chalk this up to a bad day for everyone. I said calmly, and in as a friendly tone as the circumstances would allow. The other man just laughed, a cold, bitter laugh.
That's pretty funny. Why the fuck would I let you go? My employers told me you're a piece of shit, and the world would be better without you. Plus, the amount I'm getting paid tells me I'm better not fucking over my employers.
My eyebrows raised a bit at the word employers. So you're telling me that someone has paid you to what? Torture info out of me and then kill me? Got some bad news for you, buddy. I will never tell you anything you want to know. And if I did, your employers, as you called them, would make sure you disappeared. Which you have to know if you're not a fucking moron. My abductor looked at me, studying me carefully.
Why the hell would my employers kill me? They hired me to do a job. So long as I keep my mouth shut, they'll pay me and leave me be.
He said this proudly, like he had already thought of it, and had revealed some big truth to me I was too stupid to see. Fucking moron. Right, got it, I said absent-mindedly to him. He walks over and gets in my face.
Listen, you fucking piece of shit. You're not in charge here, and I suggest you stop talking before I get pissed off. I would not want to kill you too soon.
Look, man, I don't have the use of my hands to get rid of that smell. So, if you're going to stand that close to me, can you either brush your teeth or not stand so close? Your breath smells like you just got done licking a dog's ass. The indignant look that crossed his face was comedy gold, till he grabbed two of my fingers and snapped them like they were twigs. I let out a scream that he muffled with his hands. A sick smile crossed his face.
You were saying, you smug bastard?
I was saying that you're a mama's boy, that you got torture information from a teenager that was wetting himself.
Oh, we will see about that,
He said with a smile on his face. He walked over and pressed a button.
You seem to have forgotten about the little toy I rigged up.
He said as he looked up at the swinging pendulum. The button he pressed caused it to slowly lower. After he pressed the button, he said that it would take some time to reach us. So until then, we could either have a more civilized chat or he would have some more fun. And it was up to me to choose. Sighing, I asked, so what do your employers want to know? I'm sure there's not much they don't already know about me. He looked at me.
Well, I misled you a bit. I have questions for you. My employers just told me to kill you, never said how or how fast. So, I'm going to have a bit of fun.
Oh, I said, my interest peaked for the first time in this whole tedious exchange. Well then, ask your questions and get on with it. Talking to you has caused me to lose brain cells that I can't afford to lose. Anger crossed his face, and he walked over to a table that had some tools on it. He grabbed a pair of pliers and returned to my side. A dark expression crossed his face as he spoke next.
Well, if you're going to keep your tough guy act up, then I will just have to start taking pieces of you every time you smart off to me.
He grabbed the other hand and started slowly removing my fingernails. I screamed as he did so, but I swear that only caused him to slow down and enjoy it more. After he had removed my fingernails on the left hand, he doused my hand in alcohol and wrapped my hand poorly, I might add. After I no longer saw spots and collected myself, I asked, "What the hell was that? I thought you were here to kill me, not bandage me up. Don't tell me you're too incompetent to do the one job you have here." A dark and harsh laugh left his pursed lips, something I only heard from the worst of the worst, and it finally made sense. After he finished his cold laugh, he did reply,
Oh, come on. Now you know the answer. I don't need you blacking out or bleeding out until I had my fun. But time for a question of my own. Why do my employers want you dead so bad? What is so special about you?
I looked at my hand and could feel it burning. I looked up at him and answered him. They want me because I fucked their mothers. Yours is next. He walked over and squeezed the hand that he just ripped the nails off of and asked me again.
Why the fuck do they want me to kill you?
I don't know. I don't know who the fuck hired you. He just looked at me and spoke 2 words.
The corporation.
I thought back to how I used to work for them. I was not a hunter or collector, but I did do research on the subjects they brought in. That was until they turned against me. I had to run. Kept a low profile, and yet somehow they found me. I heard my abductor's voice draw me back to reality.
So, do you need more motivation? Or will you tell me why they want you dead so bad?
I used to work for them in the labs, and I learned what they were truly doing. They came at me to kill me, but I escaped. I assumed they want me dead, to clean up any loose ends. He looked thoughtful and spoke again.
That makes sense. But I feel like there is more to the story. Tell me everything. Time is ticking away.
He looked up at the pendulum that had gotten much closer. Look, I have told you all I know. Maybe they think I know something I don't. Or maybe they just sent your dumbass on an errand, so they'd be rid of you for a bit. Either way, you are wasting what little time I have left. Can you shut up and just let me die in peace? This earned me getting the nails ripped off of my other hand. The pointless questions continue until the pendulum got so low he could no longer stand near me without risking his own well-being. He watched it, and without looking at me, he asked,
Any last words? Make them quick. You don't have long.
Just mark my words. You will die before the night's end. The company is not to be trusted. And as for why they want me dead, you'll find out soon enough. Well, it looks like it's time for death again. I whispered this last part, and my abductor asked me what I said, but it was too late. The pendulum had reached me and started to slice through my midsection. This death was slow and painful. I probably choked on my own blood long before the blade had finished cutting through my abdomen. Soon enough, my world was bathed in blackness. I always referred to this world as the waiting room. I sat down and waited the inevitable resurrection. No matter how many times this happened, I never stayed dead for too long. It's always surprising that they never send their lapdogs to capture me just to kill me. I'm starting to wonder what they are learning from my deaths. Time passed by slowly in the waiting room, but it was always so peaceful and gave me a place to clear my head. And just like that, I am back inside my body. Well, it looks the same, but it's a new body all the same. My soon-to-be former abductor is standing with his back to me on the phone with the corporation.
Yes, he is dead. Yes, his body did burn up. How long did it take? Roughly around 30 minutes to combust. What do you mean longer than last time?
As he finished that, I walked behind him and slit his throat. I picked up the phone and spoke to the person on the other end. Your dog is dead. Put another one of them down. I don't know what you're doing and why you're studying me, but it stops now. I'm going to come for you. I will bring the fight to you, and I will destroy you. Mark my words. They spoke to me after I stopped talking. Ah, Phoenix. I am so glad to hear from you. Honestly, you save us so much money killing our retrievers. But I must admit, you're getting slower to resurrect yourself. I wonder why that is. Does this mean, after a certain amount of deaths, you stay dead? How does one truly kill a phoenix? After all, this is what we want to know. Maybe we will bring you in next time. Till we meet again, have a good life. He ended the call, and I left ready to start my mission. I will find and end the vile corporation. No more will I run. It's time to bring the fight to them.